who's a senior lecturer at Cardiff University. The chat is open for your comments and questions at any time, and we'll be putting a selection of these to each of our speakers. So please feel free to add any comments and questions you might have as the moment takes you. If you'd like to get in touch with us after the forum today, you can find Transport for the North on Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn, or you can email us at research@transportforthenorth.com. Our first speaker today is Owen Wilson, who's going to provide an introduction to TfN's work on the major roads network. So over to you, Owen.
Thank you, Tom, and I'm going to be quite brief, and I'm really looking forward to this forum. So I'm going to give very brief context on TfN for those people who are not aware of our role, and then very quickly take you through some of the challenges around the major road network, thinking about what roads do for us, how they need to change, and also touch on some of the work that TfN is doing. So I'm just going to share my screen. Has that come through, Tom? Hopefully that screen has come through. If you could just confirm.
Yes, it has. Yes.
So just very briefly, Transport for the North's role. We are a subnational transport body. We represent 20 local transport authorities and 50 highway authorities in the north of England. And we have a statutory duty to provide to produce a strategic plan and provide recommendations on investment in strategic transport in the north of England. So our focus is very much on the interurban links, but of course, and that's across our partner authorities, but also into Wales, the Midlands and Scotland. But of course, they also need to integrate well with local transport links, and we work very closely with our transport authority partners and have published policy positions on active travel, for example, and are working on similar positions around multimodal hubs, park and ride facilities, and spatial planning and what that means in terms of transport. Has that not moved on? Yeah. So we published our strategic transport plan in 2019, set out some clear objectives, as you can see on the screen, what you'd expect from a transport plan. But of course, the real challenge is how do we drive up productivity in the north, which is well below the national average, increase prosperity and improve opportunities for all citizens of the north. And as I'm sure everyone on the call will know, there are real pockets of deprivation in parts of the north of England where poor connectivity contributes to that deprivation in terms of access to education and good jobs. But how do we do that whilst also protecting and enhancing the environment and dealing with the kind of key challenge of our times, which is the climate emergency and decarbonising transport? So as I said, I'm now going to focus on what we're doing around major roads, but start with actually what roads do for us and then move on to how we need to change and the work that TfN are doing. So I think, you know, it is a massive challenge and we are as a society reliant on road transport. The major road network in the north, which is around 7% of those major roads, accommodates just under 70% of all vehicle miles driven. Most freight is transported by road and 2/3 of the distance freight driven is on the major road network. And most passenger distance travelled is by road. And even with the massive investment that TfN is promoting in rail and the support for active travel, we're still going to see most transport be on the road network in the future. Most travel to work is by road, and most business-related travel is also on the road network, and that will continue in the future. So I guess the key premise is roads are critical to a modern functioning society, connecting people and places, and we will, you know, still be reliant on roads in the future. But how do we need to change? And again, you know, coming back to the decarbonisation challenge, most of the emissions, carbon emissions from surface transport, come from the road transport in the north and indeed in the country as a whole. There are a lot of very short car trips that we need to get people, you know, moving on to active travel, walking, cycling, potentially onto local bus. But that won't solve the decarbonisation challenge with a lot of the longer distance trips contributing to more than 50% of all emissions. So that's where bus and rail are important, and of course decarbonising that road transport, moving to cleaner fuels. And an area that's kind of dropped off the radar, which shouldn't be forgotten, is the cost of congestion. That's in monetary terms, but of course also the cost in terms of impacts on communities from air quality and noise. And that's going to get worse if everyone moves to EVs and there's no constraint in terms of future demand on road transport. So that's also something we need to consider. And I've mentioned the need for more walking and cycling. But how do we get anyone who has access to a car to choose rail or bus, for example, for those longer or medium distance trips? And I'm sure that most of you will have seen this chart, but it's the challenge we're working up against. In the last 10 years, road transport has actually, relative to wage increases, inflation, cost of road transport's dropped, whereas rail and bus has gone up significantly. So if you have access to a car, why would you choose those more sustainable modes? And that's something that TfN needs to be involved in the conversation with government around how we reshape that equation and encourage people to use more sustainable modes. So what's TfN doing? My last slide. So we are taking our decarbonisation strategy and an updated major roads report to TfN board next week, seeking endorsement of both those documents. The decarbonisation strategy sets out the trajectory we need to follow in the north to meet net zero commitments, and the major roads report reflects on some of the key challenges and the work we need to do in terms of road transport. We've looked at potential future scenarios and are using those to appraise our transport schemes, including investment in roads. So that's looking at things like spatial planning decisions around user charging potentially on road, and how that will impact in the future on people's travel behaviours, and taking that work, using that to appraise our initial investment programme. So we're working towards updating our recommendations on transport investment next year, with a report planned in the summer of next year. We're also taking forward work on electric vehicle and hydrogen refuelling, because that has to be part of the answer, and we think there needs to be a strategy or framework setting out what's required across the north of England, rather than just leaving it to the market to decide. And this is perhaps one of the more challenging areas, but have stated the willingness to work with governments on looking at approaches to taxation and revenue from transport, potential for future models for raising revenue from road users, and how that revenue could be used to support all modes of transport, not just the road network in the future. And that's, as I'm sure everyone knows, is something that has to happen purely in terms of the diminishing tax revenues from petrol and diesel vehicles as we move towards electrifying the fleet. So I'll stop there, Tom, with that quick overview from TfN, and are you going to hand over to Daniela?
Thank you very much for that, Owen. Tom, are there any questions for Owen in the chat?
There's nothing come through as of yet. No, thank you, Owen.
Thank you very much for that, Owen. I just wonder, whilst we've got you, and not to put you on the spot too much, you mentioned the future travel scenarios work in your presentation there, which is an absolutely fascinating piece of work. And I was just wondering if you could give a little bit more of an explanation for those who might not be familiar with it, what kind of analysis and work that's been undertaken in relation to that.
Okay, I'll try and be brief, because this was developed collaboratively with industry experts and with our partners in the north, and also with National Highways and Network Rail, and it's an uncertainty analysis. So we looked at the potential futures states looking ahead to 2050, and how people's behaviours might change, policies might change, impacting on behaviours, and we're using that to assess future transport demand, both rail and road and bus, all modes. So the types of change you might see are different planning policies. Clearly, planning decisions have a big impact on transport demand, whether we have more dispersed development or more compact urban development, with the latter likely to be more favourable in terms of reducing car demand. There's impacts around people's willingness to share mobility and share data, potentially again lead to more efficient use of the network, but there may be some people may be reluctant to share data, for example, and car share, and impacts around policy on fares, taxation of drivers, etc., how they might change. So we came up with four what we're saying are credible or plausible futures that we've used to model future transport demand up to 2050 in incremental periods from now up to 2050, which we'll use in our appraisal process and appraise our recommended investments against those different scenarios. It's not right to say that any one is a preferred scenario. This is about testing for uncertainty, but clearly if an investment performs well throughout, in all those scenarios, it's got a stronger case for taking that forward.
Thank you very much, Owen. Tom, I see a question has come into the chat on TfN's role on road freight. If you wouldn't mind asking that one, please.
Yep, sure. It's just a general question to Owen, really, about whether you're able to say anything about how road freight fits into TfN's remit.
Yeah, so actually I should have mentioned we are also developing a freight strategy for the North, which is due to go to our board in January, and that's been developed by my colleague Lucy Hudson, working with industry partners, and it looks at road and rail freight. And TfN has been very clear we want to see more freight moved by rail, particularly east-west, where rail connections are poor. Sorry, I'm getting a bad network quality. Hopefully you can still hear me okay. In terms of road freight, it's still going to be, as I said, the road network's still going to be critical for freight movements, both HGV and LGV, and we've seen a big increase in LGV freight in the last year, 5 or 6% increase on pre-COVID. So we need to think about how you promote more efficient movement of that freight on the network, which is a combination of getting the network to work well, but also maybe better consolidation of freight on vehicles, so you've not got vehicles moving half empty. Last and first mile deliveries, how do you get that freight onto sort of zero emission or more environmentally friendly modes where it's being delivered in the urban area? And of course, some of our partners are bringing in clean air zones, which will actually there'll be penalty for polluting HGVs within those urban areas. So so we'll be publishing this freight strategy early in the new year, and that will look at both road and rail.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Owen. And if anyone would like to read any further information, both on the freight side and the other aspects of work that Owen was discussing there, they're available on TfN's website. Thank you very much for that, Owen.
Thanks, Tom.
Our second speaker today is Dr. Daniela Paddeu, who's going to discuss her research on road freight decarbonisation, following on very nicely from what Owen was discussing there. So I'll hand over to you, Daniela.
Thank you. So can you see my slides? Hopefully you can.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you very much. Very interesting presentation, and I have to say I work with Glenn Lyons, who is very familiar with the scenario planning, and I find it, I agree with Owen, it's very fascinating to look at the future and see how it might look like. I'm here today to present you some results from a project I led in the North in collaboration with Transport for the North and University of Newcastle, and this is about urban freight decarbonization in the north of England. So freight, as it was a hot topic in the chat earlier, but it's about freight, but looking at the urban side of it. So last mile deliveries, home deliveries, and all the solutions that might be implemented to reduce carbon emissions generated by urban goods movements. Okay, so energy has been for a long time the dominant sector in terms of carbon emission, but due to the advancements in the technology in the energy sector and the large use of renewable energy sources, the sector has actually improved in the last years, and transport has recently become the worst sector. As you can see here, is the first one. Here you can see the greenhouse gas emissions produced by the transport sector, and freight is about 1/3 of carbon emissions due to transport. These data are from the Department for Transport, actually a survey they conducted to understand the composition of the national van fleet and the factors affecting the growth in this sector. The survey looked at the van ownership, the primary uses of vans, van mileage, where and when vans are traveling, and environmental factors. It involved 20,000 van drivers, and the final statistics were published by DfT in April 2021, but data were collected before COVID anyway. So why DfT wanted to conduct a survey of vans? Because in the last 15-20 years, the number of vans has exponentially grown, increasing by more than 106%. And it is expected to follow growing. We saw a big growth during COVID as well, and we expect this is going to follow on after COVID. It is worth noting that 96% of vans in the UK are diesel, and only 0.3% are ultra-low emission vehicles. It is also interesting to see here, you can see some factors about influencing the next purchasing decision in terms of vans. And it is interesting to see that environmental concerns and use of low emission or clearer zones were indicated to be important factors when deciding to buy a new next van from van drivers. It is also interesting to see that not all the vans movements are related to freight, and actually 41% of the usage is due to carrying equipment, tools or materials, so services. So how do we imagine the future? We tend perhaps optimistically to think, or so we hope more than think, that the future is going to be, in terms of transport, more sustainable, more efficient and safer. But to what extent is this true? And what are we going to do to shape a better future? So last mile deliveries are the most expensive and least efficient leg of the whole supply chain, and are responsible for a significant negative impact on air quality and public health. Recently, we've been thinking on new technologies as a possible solution to improve the quality and efficiency of urban freight movements, including autonomous vehicles, robots, aerial drones, and digital manufacturing like 3D printing. However, where are we in terms of technological development, and what kind of policy implications or policy requirements we need to implement these new technologies? We might actually have a series of solutions ready to go, already existing, to reduce carbon emissions due to urban freight. So in the first group, I would like to include all the solutions to reduce the number of vehicles, delivery vehicles, and these might include low emission zones, clearer zones, urban consolidation centers, and also pack stations that are like similar to the Amazon lockers that you might all know. However, there might be a series of issues related to these solutions, such as the actual effectiveness and acceptance from retailers and logistics operators, especially in respect to the urban consolidation center and the limited capacity for the pack station and Amazon lockers as well. There might be other solutions that are actually solutions to reduce the impact of carbon emissions. So, for example, electric vehicles, clean fuels, cargo bikes or e-cargo bikes, night deliveries. In this case, we might have a series of other problems like specific infrastructure requirements and energy requirements, and we will need significant investments as well to adapt the infrastructure and enable these vehicles to be on our road. And then in group 3, we might include all those solutions related to shared delivery platforms and systems like Uber Eats or Deliveroo, including digital platforms where freight operators can share information about flows and loads in order to optimize the efficiency of last mile deliveries. What do we expect in the future? Well, we might have autonomous vehicles. There have been a series of trials and experiments run in the US and Europe, including the UK. There might be a series of advantages, especially related to a significant reduction of costs, especially as we are seeing like the driver shortage. But there are many uncertainties related to public acceptance, safety and security issues, trust, privacy concern, and willingness to share the space, especially in the case of the bots. You can see here from pedestrians to share the pavement with these robots. We might have other solutions to reduce the number of vehicles in the road. So we can move actually congestion from road to air if we use drones. However, also in this case, we might need between 15, 18 drones to replace only one van. And so are we really sure we want to have all these flying things on our heads in our cities? Finally, we might have solutions related to network optimization, routing, nowcasting, and the blockchain, but this might require strong collaboration and trust in the system and in the other freight actors, because they will be sharing information with competitors. So how can we design new and more sustainable urban freight systems and make them acceptable and viable? Stakeholders' retention and users' acceptance are widely recognized in the literature to be key enablers and to support local authorities to design and implement sustainable urban freight system. This is why stakeholder engagement becomes a key point when working on sustainable freight transport planning. And this is why co-production and stakeholder engagement were keywords for the Code Zero project. So the aim of the project is to explore stakeholders' perspective towards freight systems in order to co-design a series of scenarios to reduce carbon emissions in the north of England related to the urban environment. So we're still looking at urban freight. And stakeholders were also required to identify potential drivers and barriers for the implementation of the solutions they identified. So as you can see here, there is the Code Zero project. I was also involved in another project that was called Crafted, again, related to freight decarbonization, but with a more regional perspective. Crafted was based in the southwest of England, so we explored regional issues related to the southwest, but those issues might be actually transferred to other regions, such as the north of England. And Code Zero was more specific to urban freight, was in collaboration, as I said, with Transport for the North and Newcastle University. It was a small-scale project, and the focus was urban freight. Okay, so we organized a series of online workshops with key freight stakeholders. This is an example of the co-design framework that we use. So we try to identify uncertainties to implement decarbonization strategies in the north. We try to identify with the stakeholders solutions and to evaluate the potential of these solutions on urban freight decarbonization. And then we ended up designing a urban freight decarbonization roadmap for the north of England. When we talk about freight decarbonization, we can't really talk about freight as a system, an independent system, as there are a series of dependencies with other systems like the energy sector, for example, the manufacturing sector, and again, policy, behavior change, and a series of other components. So we try to take these into consideration when we were defining the solutions as well. These are just some examples of the boards. We use digital boards because it was during COVID. So we were able to collect data and engage with stakeholders online and using a Miro board. These are some of the questions we've been asking in the project. And then here are the results. So in terms of uncertainties, we found that there were several uncertainties related to technical issues. So what kind of method is going to be the best one to decarbonize urban freight? It's going to be electrification, alternative fuels, hydrogen. However, how are we making sure? How can we make sure that we're going to have enough energy, enough electricity or other fuels to refuel the whole fleet in the north? And what are we going to do with the infrastructure, refueling stations? How are we going to redesign the infrastructure to make sure that urban freight in the north is going to be a viable solution? We also identified economic uncertainties, mainly related to cost effectiveness of alternative fuels compared to diesel options, so diesel vans. Then policy and financial uncertainties, so who is going to make decisions about what method we can use in the north? Are we going to use standardized policies all across the UK, or is the north going to be independent from the rest of the country? And then organizational and behavioral uncertainties, especially related to collaborative schemes and collaboration among stakeholders. Freight stakeholders identified a range of solutions and the related drivers and barriers, as I said. I'm going to show you here 4 main clusters that they identified together. So in the first cluster, they thought that micromobility, so e-cargo bikes, porters, but also some electric vans, in combination with micro-consolidation centers, could be a solution to reduce congestion and emissions in urban areas in the north. This is due to a combined effect of micro-consolidation, so consolidation of goods, reduction of vehicles, but also of more of cleaner delivery options, so e-cargo bikes. However, the main barrier here is related to collaboration among stakeholders, as many brands might take a commercial advantage when using a micro-consolidation center, a consolidation center in general. So logistics operators like to have their brand recognized in urban areas, especially by retailers and then consumers. In addition, there might potentially be added costs and higher disruption due to the additional node of the consolidation center. So I leave you with a key question from stakeholders about this cluster of solutions. Big logistics operators already consolidate at a very optimal level. Are we sure this is going to be a commercially, operationally viable option? The second cluster of solution presents rapid rail logistics with shared passenger freight trains used to move goods between hubs and the using of micromobility or e-vans for the very last mile. So this was actually quite popular for the north. This is similar in some sense to the previous cluster, as we're still considering hubs, urban consolidation centers in the previous case, railway stations in this case. And this was actually quite popular in the north because of the proximity of bigger cities such as Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds and Sheffield. So we could consider these cities like a kind of macro-urban system where goods are moved by rapid transit rail systems in between cities using railway station as a network of hubs. And these hubs are then connected to other sustainable solutions such as micro-mobility for the very last mile within the city. In this case, the main drivers are a significant reduction of trucks and vans due to the shift to rail and related carbon emissions reduction. Also, if home working will become a common trend in the future, it would be useful to rethink how to use the unused capacity of trains and stations as people commute less. However, some interventions would be required to enlarge the space in the railway stations in order to convert the railway stations into bigger logistics hubs. And this also might mean that we need some logistics land availability and land use regulations to change the use of the railway stations. A key point from stakeholders about this cluster was that rail freight could be used as a priority or more convenient option to deliver high volumes of construction materials into urban centers. The third cluster of solution is related to electrification and new fuels, including biogases, LNG, and hydrogen. Actually, hydrogen was the most popular one. Similarly to the previous case, we would have a reduction in carbon and polluting emissions in this case, but not congestion, because we're just converting diesel vehicles. We're just shifting from diesel vehicles to electric vehicles, so congestion might actually be the same. On the other hand, this solution would require investment in infrastructures and energy or supply availability, and also trucks. So AGVs at the moment are not so easy to decarbonize, and the electric trucks don't perform very well, especially in terms of size of the battery and reduction of load capacity. Electric vans are performing actually quite well, so they might be easier to decarbonize for the last mile. A key question from this cluster was, is electric the only net zero solution for an urban environment? Can compressed natural gas or liquefied natural gas have a role, given that the goal is net zero, not absolute zero? And this is the final cluster of solutions. This is related to collective and collaborative procurement and collaborative schemes in general, to maximize the efficiency of the system and at the same time reducing carbon emissions. The drivers to implement this solution would be a more optimized system with a reduction of demand for loading and unloading space, a more sized service where it is possible to achieve economy of scale. However, this might be actually the most difficult to implement due to the requirements of intense collaboration among stakeholders who are usually not willing to collaborate due to competitiveness, and it might be even harder for new smaller players to enter the market, creating therefore inequalities in terms of market. A key question about this cluster was, what if some players gain a greater advantage than others? So we ended up with this route map or roadmap, whatever you prefer. It was quite hard to define a route map for crafted, so for the regional project, but we tried to do it with the code zero for the north of England for the urban freight decarbonisation. We can see that the stakeholders expect a quick win to be freight consolidation with micromobility and clean vans, or the use of new fuels. Rail freight could potentially play a role between bigger cities in the north for intercity connections, but the concept could also be extended to other UK areas, such as the London area, for example, with rail connections between macro hubs. However, it was interesting to see how stakeholders saw new technologies such as automation or drones as additional solutions rather than key solutions for the decarbonisation of urban freight, but could be anyway included. So I'm showing you in view here some the new technologies in the roadmap could be included to add benefits to freight decarbonisation plans and strategies. So in conclusion, we expected technological solutions to play a big role in freight decarbonisation. So actually when I started the project, I had recently concluded some other projects on new technologies and automation. So I was a bit biased about the role of new technologies on freight decarbonisation, and I expected stakeholders to be excited as I was, but they weren't. They thought clean vehicles such as electric vehicles could play a big role in the long term. Hydrogen could play actually a good role in the mid-term. Achieving freight decarbonisation is possible, but requires total focus from the individual citizen consumer decision through to national carbon budgeting. We found that more than stakeholder, like citizens' engagement and behavior change might be actually key. Perhaps 50-50 sharing with technologies, new technologies, automation, but also cleaner technology can share the responsibility in terms of freight decarbonisation with behavior change in terms of end consumers' choices and in general stakeholder behavior moving to a more sustainable choice. The current transport planning and prioritization processes continue to focus more on passengers, even though Owen told us that you are working on a freight strategy in the north. But at the moment, the emphasis put on freight is insufficient, considering the scale of the issue. So I want to leave you with this, which is a slide about the future. What will the future look like in 2050 or 2040? Is it going to be greener, more inclusive, more efficient, more accessible, more conscious in terms of carbon emissions? And a question from me is, how do we get there? So thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay.
Thank you very much, and sorry about that. I just at the crucial moment as you were coming to the end of your presentation there, I received a notification that my network had dropped, but only missed a moment of what you're saying there. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. Tom, do we have any questions in the Q&A, please?
Yes, but we've had a few questions come in, so I'll pair a couple up if you like. So the first pair that I'll put to you, I guess, is whether you've considered using trams to service clients along routes, and alongside that, sort of how it could be possible to use rubber-wheeled vehicles in the city centres due to there being no safe levels for non-exhaust emissions.
Sorry, the first one was trams.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So we didn't get to specify exactly what kind of vehicles we were going to consider. We didn't mention, no one mentioned trams, to be honest. It could actually be something to consider in terms of shifting from road to rail or more sustainable options, but we didn't mention it. Yeah, it could be good. We actually mentioned rail just for the medium distances, so in between bigger cities like rapid rail, sharing the capacity with passengers as well to make the most of the capacity of trains, as at the moment rail is actually not very competitive compared to road, so it's not competitive for urban deliveries, so in last mile and short distances, but train might be actually something to consider. And the other one?
The other one, sorry, was how we'll be able to use rubber-wheeled vehicles in the city centre for deliveries due to there being no safe levels for non-exhaust emissions.
Can you repeat what kind of vehicles?
Rubber-wheeled vehicles.
I believe that might relate to a point on
the cargo bikes.
Particulate emissions potentially from vehicles in city centres, and how we might manage the ongoing impacts of those emissions.
So is it related to the current fleet?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And the question is, sorry, I didn't get. So it is related to the current fleet, and how can we make sure that the policy don't allow those vehicles to access the city centre?
Essentially, yeah, because there's no safe levels of non-exhaust emissions.
Yeah, so, well, actually, there are all the policies related to traffic restrictions and clearer zones going on at the moment. So sometimes it's hard to be strong in terms of telling people not to do something. Okay, so in terms of politician, but as behavior change is quite hard to achieve, I would say that establishing stronger or more rigid regulations to access urban areas would be actually the way to go, the only way of making sure that we're going to reduce the polluting emissions, especially not just carbon emissions, but also particulate matter and NOx levels in city centers, which are those that are most dangerous for public health. So making sure that we don't allow vehicles who are polluting the air, who are producing like exhaust emissions or polluting emissions, not to access the city center would be like important, especially because only I think I mentioned it earlier, about 0.5% of the fleet at the moment in terms of van is low emission or ultra low emission. So we're still very far away from decarbonizing vans at the moment. So I hope that replied to the question. I'm not sure if it was.
Thank you very much. And a question from me: if there are any leading international examples or other examples that you can point to and are aware of that are leading the way on road freight decarbonisation, and that have perhaps already tackled some of the issues that you were discussing.
Yeah, so there are several examples in Europe, especially looking at the regional more than the urban. I would say, as in the previous presentation, you were talking about the freight strategy, looking more at the regional size. There are some very good examples in the north of Europe, especially in the Netherlands, related to synchromodality, which is basically shifting. It is an optimization of all the modes, especially rail, road, and shipping. And it is also based on the concept of collaboration among stakeholders. So using synchromodality, shifting from road to rail, optimizing the load of the vehicles in general, trains and trucks, and sharing information and customers, even though it's quite hard to achieve, I know, but they're getting like very positive results on that side. So like making sure that stakeholders and freight operators and the freight industry can collaborate. They can collaborate with each others, and then moving from road to rail. This is something that is like a key concept for synchromodality, and it would be something that might be actually considered in the UK and in the north, considering also the willingness to maximize the capacity on the rail infrastructure as well.
Thank you very much, and thank you once again for sharing your research.
Thank you.
Our next speaker today is Professor Miquel-Àngel Garcia-López, who's discussing his research on highway congestion across European cities. So I'll hand over to you.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. By the way, you can call me Mikhail, that's all, right? Miquel-Àngel. I'm not Angel anymore. Okay, I'm Mikhail, that's all. Thank you so much. I'm very happy for being here, and I'm gonna give you some details about my recent research that is gonna be published at the Journal of Economic Geography. Let me see if I can share my screen with you guys. Okay, I guess you can see. Yeah, can you see my slides? No.
One moment and that will come live. There we are. You're free to go.
That's better. Okay. Yeah, can you see it now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. So this is a joint research with my beloved co-author Elizabeth, right? And a former PhD student, Ilias Pasidis, right? And what we do in this paper is to study ways to alleviate congestion in cities, right? And here congestion is at the road level. And in particular, we focus on highways. Okay, I think I don't need to convince you that road congestion is a big issue in urban areas nowadays, right? If we take a look to the top 10 congested cities, there are 3 Europeans: Rome, Paris, and London. And I guess I don't need to explain you about the cause of this congestion, right? So, for example, let me give you some details. So, in Rome, in a study by Jos van Ommeren, for example, they computed the number of hours spent when driving because of congestion, and they compute like for a year 166 hours. So this is a lot. From an economic point of view, from a monetary point of view, there are estimates highlighting that in Europe, in a year, congestion costs are related to more than 280 billion euros. This means 1% of the European GDP, right? And at the individual level, we have also estimates about this congestion cost in Berlin, more than 1,000 euros, and for the case of London, almost 2,000 euros per year per driver. So a lot of money we are spending because of congestion, and also we also have negative consequences related to employment, pollution, and health. Daniela have been talking about pollution, right? Road facilities and other negative consequences, right? So here the question is what we can do to solve this congestion, right? And one of the common options has been to add additional roadway capacity. So the traditional increase in the number of highway lanes would be one example, or the construction of new highways, or adding more length to a pre-existing highway network, right? This would be an option. But the question now is whether this new capacity really reduces road congestion, right? According to the fundamental law of traffic congestion, if we do this, we won't solve congestion problem in our cities, right? So according to this law, the travel speed on an expanded road reverts to its previous level before the capacity expansion. What I'm going to show you today is something done for the case of European cities. We are going to test the fundamental law of traffic congestion in European cities, and I'm going to show you that we see in the case of Europe that congestion increases more proportionally when we expand highways, right? So since I'm an economist, I'm going to show you some graph. I need to show some graph. If not, I'm not going to sleep well tonight. So this is the idea. Here you have lab with the short-term effects of an expansion in the capacity of a road network, for example. Short-term effects, and on the right graph you have the long-term effects. So the main idea is that when we expand road capacity, we increase the supply of travel, okay, and this allows us to decrease the price of travel. We have less congested roads, and as a consequence, we have an increase in quantity, okay, in quantity of travel, okay. This is what we call an induced demand effect, okay. But this is not static. These things change over time. And the main idea is that between the short and the long run, we have people that is going to shift from other modes to driving, so increasing more the demand effect, the induced demand effect. People would drive longer trips or would have more frequent trips, right? And then there are some research. Some of this research is mine, for example, showing that when we improve transportation networks, we also cause relocation change in our cities. So, for example, we have population suburbanization effects, right? And also employment decentralization effects because of these transportation improvements. As a whole, all of these generate the long-term effects. So at the end of the day, we are going to increase also the demand, not only the supply, the demand increase, and more quantity of travel we are going to have in our road network, right? According to the fundamental law, we will have the same level of congestion in our road network because of the highway expansion, of the road capacity expansion, sorry, but according to our results, we will see that we increase more the congestion levels, right? There are just few studies from, at least in urban economics, studying the fundamental law of road congestion. The first one, they focus attention on the short run effect. So they estimated elasticities around 0.5, 0.8. So the increase in the highway capacity is bigger than the increase in the induced demand, right? And as a result, in the short term, congestion decreases, as we saw in the first graph, okay? But studies like Duranton and Turner or Su and Sang for US cities and Japanese Japanese urban areas, they focus on the long-term effects and they find opposite effects. So they find elasticities equal to 1 in the case of Durangton and Turner. So congestion remains constant in the long term. So we go back to the initial level of congestion, right? And in the case of Su and San, they find similar results that in our case, in the European case. They estimate elasticities larger than 1, and as a result, congestion increases. Okay? So what we do in our research is to focus, as I said, in European cities. In particular, we use the delineation of cities by the Eurostat and OECD, the functional urban area, okay? We consider 545 of them. They belong to 29 countries. One of them is the UK. If I'm not wrong, and we are including more than 25, 30 urban areas in the case of the UK. And then we use data, traffic data from road traffic censuses from the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe that provides us information about the annual average daily traffic per segment level. So it's a very nice data set at a very small microgeographical level, segment level. So we have also information about the length of these segments, whether they are tolled or not. And we have information every 5 years from 1985 to 2005, right? Besides, we have also information about the evolution of the highway network in Europe. We will include controls for socioeconomic characteristics of these cities. We are going to control also for the size of the cities in terms of population, and we will take into account also the history and the geography of the cities, right? Let me show you some figures here. Here you have the evolution of the annual average daily traffic, the first row, and the vehicle kilometers traveled. This is going to be our main explanatory, our main dependent variable, the one that we are going to use to measure congestion. Unfortunately, we don't have information about travel time. This would be our best option, but we don't have this kind of information, so we use a quantity variable to measure congestion. And as you can see, I highlight some figures here. The annual average daily traffic increased more than 50% in only 20 years. Traffic almost doubled, so VKT increased from 2.7 to 4.6 millions of kilometers, so 72% of increase. And you can see also here something that maybe the economists we are more interested. Here you have the standard deviation in parentheses that they are huge. So this means that our sample is quite diverse. So the cities are not experiencing the same level of congestion in this case, right? This is quite interesting in our case, in the European case, right? Based on this data, here you have the list of the top 10 congested cities in Europe. The first one, I guess you know the city, London, UK, with more than 66 million kilometers in 2005 in VKT, vehicles kilometers traveled, sorry. Okay, the fourth is West Midlands, and the last one, the 10th, Manchester. Okay, then I took a look to the top, to the bottom 10 cities in the congested list to show you UK city, but I'm afraid that there is no UK city there. Important thing is that you can see that in this top 10 of the most congested cities, all of them increase the VKT, the congestion. You can see also Madrid in the case of Spain, but since I'm in Barcelona, I don't care too much about Madrid. But look at this increase of 82% in 20 years. But in the first year, they in fact decrease the congestion levels, right? This is something that we are studying right now in another research that we are conducting. Okay, here you have a map. Sometimes maps are better. Here you have the annual average daily traffic, 1985. And here you have 2005. Using the same thresholds, okay, you can see that congestion in 2005 was everywhere in Europe, right? VKT at the city level for 1985 and 2005. Again, we can see bigger dots in the whole of Europe and even in the UK if we focus on the UK, right? Okay, this would be the congestion part. What about the highway expansion? I don't have too much time to give you details. Here you have a nice table summarizing everything. We have expanded the highway network in Europe a lot, more than double. You can see 163% during these 20 years, okay? Half of this network is in our sample of cities, right? 35,000 kilometers. And it also increased more than double, 140% of increase. The expansion of the highways took place in the coverage, right? More length, okay? But also in the capacity, building more lanes, okay? You can see here the increase in the number of lanes, 31% in 20 years, and 45% in the length. These two dimensions, we are going to consider them to test also the fundamental law. Okay, so what we do, I'm going to try not to be too technical in this case. What we do is to study the impact of a highway capacity measure, in this case is lane kilometers, okay, on congestion levels. And here you have the VKT as our dependent variable. And we are going to control, following this econometric approach, for population, socioeconomic variables, geography, and history. Right? We are going to consider three alternative econometric approach, pooled regression approach, the standard one, this one, and then these other two. So the idea is that we have a panel of cities, observation for different cities in different points in time. So there are some characteristics that they are time invariant. They don't change over time, like geographical one, historical one, and maybe other that we don't take into account in these regressions, in the pool regression. So we are going to use these alternative ways to estimate the relationship, the panel fixed effect approach, and the first difference approach. Okay, one of the problems that we need to address, I'm going to mention this quickly, is that maybe highway lanes, our measure of the highway capacity, is endogenous to the congestion. So maybe we expand highways because we have a congestion problem, right? With the idea of solving the congestion problem. So we have a reverse causality problem here that we need to address. To do this, we use a standard approach, the instrumental variables approach here, in which what we do is we use historical transportation infrastructure, historical railroads, and historical roads to predict our modern our modern transportation network variable. In this case, lane kilometers, and also we will use this for the case of railroads. So at the end of the day, we end up working with instruments based on Roman roads. So we go back to the Roman period to try to explain the length and the lane kilometers of the highways in modern days, okay? And we are going to use also the 19th century railroads, 1870, to predict modern railroads, okay? This is a big challenge, but I think we made it, okay? Just a map to show you this historical transportation network in Europe. And we also explored these two additional transportation networks, 19th century postal routes, and 15th century trade routes in orange here. I think you cannot see them too very well, but anyway, we also tried to use them, but they didn't have any predictive power, so we end up with these two ones. Roman for highways and 19th century railroads for modern railroads, right? And here I'm going to show you the results. Okay, I'm not going to explain anything more about econometrics. So the idea is that we follow here. Here I show you the two first strategies: pool strategy, panel strategy. Okay, columns 1, 3, and 4 gradually include explanatory variables. Column 2 and 5 are the one more important because they include the full set of control variables. So what we are estimating here is a 0.6, and in column 2, 0.2 effect. What does it mean, these two effects? They means that if we increase highway capacity, in this case, lane kilometers, by 1% in our cities, congestion is going to increase by 1.2 according to the panel results, or by 1.6 according to the bullet results. Okay. In fact, the two estimated coefficients are not statistically different, right? So what I'm saying is that if we, according to these results, if we increase highway capacity with the idea of solving in the long term congestion problems, the answer is going to be no. We won't solve the problems. We are gonna generate more problems. The increase in congestion levels is going to be proportionally larger than the increase in the capacity of the highway capacity, right? So we would end up with more congestion, right? Here in this new table, you have the results with the third approach, with a first difference approach, okay? And you can see exactly the same results. An estimated coefficient above 1.2 in this case. And again, this means that expanding the highway network wouldn't solve the congestion levels. In fact, they would have the opposite effect. Congestion is going to be worse. Okay? So, the answer for the fundamental law to this question, sorry. Does the fundamental law apply in Europe? Yes, the answer is yes. Okay? Like in the US, like in Japan. Okay? What we do more? We also, remember that I showed you this table about the highway network expansion in Europe, and we talk about lanes and about length. Okay, so what we do is to take into to split this variable that we were using, lane kilometers, in two variables. The two components, in fact, the length and the average of number of lanes in each segment in the highway. Okay, to see whether maybe we can solve the congestion problem only extending the highway network, building more kilometers of highway, but not the number of lanes. Or the opposite, maybe the solution is widening the highways, building more lanes, right? Here you have the results. Column 1 and 2 show separate results without including the other highway variable, and the most important results here are in column 3, which include both variables. And here you can see also that the estimated coefficients are above 1. Again, this means that it doesn't matter if we decide to expand the highway capacity by building more lanes or building more kilometers of highways. At the end of the day, in the long term, we will end up with more congestion. Take a look to this coefficient here, the one related to the number of lanes. The impact is even bigger. Doubling the lanes of the highway network would cause growth in VKT, our measure of congestion, of 220%, right? So doubling the lanes would have a more than double effect on the congestion levels. Okay, so what's next? So, okay, we are like European, like US cities, like Japanese cities. Is there another way to solve congestion? I don't know. But we thought when we were conducting this research, we said, okay, maybe one of the things that makes different European cities versus US cities is the fact that in Europe, we use road pricing schemes above all to finance the infrastructure, okay? And two, we also invest a lot in public transportation, in particular in railroads. So let's see what happens with the previous results when we take into account these two characteristics, right? So first we consider road pricing schemes, tolls, okay? Half of the cities in our sample have tolls, right? And on average, tolls affect 25% of the highway networks of these cities. Okay, so what we do is to estimate what we have in equation 4, the previous equations, including this explanatory variable, an interaction between the main explanatory variable, the highway capacity, okay, with the tolls. And we define tolls, as I can show now in this table, in two ways. First, we use a dummy variable to state which cities have a toll in the highway network. This is column 1, or to highlight the cities with at least 25% of highways of tolled highways. Okay, this would be column 2, or in column 3, what we use is a more continuous measure of tolls. We use the share of tolls, right? Whether if we have 25% of tolls in our highway network, or for example, in some cases, we have that the 100% of the highway network is tolled, okay, of that city. Important. What we see is that we keep getting this effect related to the fundamental law. Increasing the lane kilometers means having more congestion, okay, more than proportional congestion, okay. But what matters more now is this negative significant estimated effect here, and in particular here. This one is the one telling us that if we toll our highway network, if we include tolls in our highway network, we can alleviate congestion problems. So, in particular, if you allow me to explain these coefficients here would show us that a 1% increase, in lane kilometers, or our measure of highway capacity, increases congestion by 1.9%, so almost double the congestion levels, only in cities without tolls, okay? But then, if we take a look to this second coefficient, the -1 related to the tolls, only 0.3%, this is the difference between the two coefficients, would be the effect in tolled highways. So we have an induced demand effect in cities with tolled highways, yes, but now the induced demand effect is smaller than the increase in the highway capacity. So in other words, we can alleviate congestion problems if we toll our highways, if we include tolls in our highway network. Okay, so the question that arises now is, okay, which is the minimum share of tolled highways that we need to solve congestion problems? So using the average values of DKT lane kilometers in our sample, we compute these to 56%. So cities with at least 56% of their highway network with tolls, okay, are the ones that they can reduce congestion problems by expanding highway capacity. The other ones, they would have, the ones with less than 56%, the other ones would increase congestion levels above the initial levels. Okay? The second characteristic in European cities, as I said, is the huge investment in public transportation. We focus on railroads. Okay? Railroad expansion in European cities in this 21st period, it was around 60%. So from 32,000 kilometers to 52,000 kilometers. So a lot. We invest a lot in the railroad system. What we do? We go back to the previous equation, and now we are going to include a variable to measure the effect of the public transportation, to measure the effect of the length of the railroad system in our city, right? As I told you, here we also have an additional endogeneity problem. Maybe we have a reverse causation problem here with the provision of railroads, so we use historic instruments to address the endogeneity problem. And here you have the results, okay? Again, the results for fundamental law hold, okay? If we expand highway capacity, congestion levels are going to increase, okay, more than proportional. This is what means this 1.4 significant estimated effect. But if we increase railroad provision, if we increase public transportation, in this case, building more railroad lanes, then you can see this negative and significant estimated coefficient. That means that we can decrease congestion levels, right? In particular, if we take on this coefficient, if we increase 1% the length of the railroad network, then we would decrease congestion level by 50%. By 0.5%. In other words, if we double the highway network in an average city, right? If we double the railroad network in this average city, congestion in highways would decrease by 50%, right? And the mechanism is similar to the fundamental law, but in the opposite direction. Remember that I explained that the fundamental law is related to the induced demand effect, right? So the decrease in the price of travel attract more users for driving from other modes. So in this case, would be the opposite. People who was driving in the past now is going to use the railroad transportation. Okay. Here I highlight another interesting result. Here we interact the railroad variable with the share of the subways. To be honest, we only have 32 cities in this sample of 545 cities that they have subways. Okay, but we wanted to know whether having a railroad more based on subways and less on commuting railroad, something like that, matter or not. And the answer is yes. The higher the share of the subways, right, this negative and significant estimated effect show us that the higher the share of the subway, the more negative the impact of public transportation on congestion level. So building more subway lines would decrease more the highway congestion than a traditional commuter railroad network. Okay, so subways have even stronger congestion relief benefits. And just to conclude, the idea is that we know that congestion and all its bad consequences are a serious issue for European cities, right? European cities are not so different from the US or the Japanese one. If we expand highways, we won't decrease congestion unless we use tolls. Okay, we can expand the highway network and alleviate congestion, but we need to toll this highway network. Okay, the other conclusion that we found in our research is that public transportation matters and allow us to decrease congestion. Okay, in particular subways. Okay, that's all. I'm done. Thank you so much for your attention, and I will be very happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much. Tom, were there any questions in the chat?
Yeah, we've got a couple that are sort of linked, I guess. So I'll take them together if that's okay with you, Mikhail.
Yeah, sure.
One of them is, if congestion is such a problem, why is congestion the worst in the most successful cities? And I guess sort of linked to that, according to many appraisal approaches, induced demand is viewed as a good thing because it stimulates higher mobility and more economic activity, even where congestion isn't alleviated. Do you have any suggestions on how to respond to that claim?
Yeah, okay. So as a urban economist, I know that the most successful cities have the highest level of congestion, right? At the end of the day, cities exist because we interact there, right? And we need mobility to provide this type of interactions, right? That make the city a success place to live to work and to produce, right? If we think about agglomeration economies, we have cities face this balance between agglomeration economies and congestion, right? And congestion, okay, I would say, and the economic Hello, can you hear me? I think I
Yes.
lost you.
Yes, we can. You're
Okay.
back. I think we had a connection blip there, but you're back.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. So what I was saying is that cities exist because we have two forces there, right? The centrifugal forces, agglomeration economies, and the other side we have the dispersion forces here, and congestion is one of these dispersion forces. Okay. So the balance is that when our agglomeration economies are higher than the congestion forces, like congestion, then the cities exist. If not, we will leave all the cities. Even in a pandemic period that we are living, we are facing these new balances. Okay, so I fully agree with the fact that the most congested cities are at the same time the more successful cities. But there are different degrees of congestion here. Okay, maybe we should think about why some firms and people reallocate because of congestion problems. Okay, and I'm sure that maybe they reallocate not far away from the central city. Okay, they are not going to choose a rural area. They are going to choose a more suburban or peripheral area, but close to the central city. Right? But the question here is not to allow congestion problems to increase too much. Again, the problem that we face in this research is that we are not using a proper measure of congestion that would be travel speed. Okay, travel speed would be a better dependent variable in our study. But since we didn't have this kind of information, we used this quantity measure, the VKT.
Thank you very much, and thank you once again for a very interesting piece of research and your presentation. Thank you, and our next forum will be on the 16th of February. More information on that will be heading to you shortly. If you have a project that you'd like to present at a future forum or any ideas for themes that you'd like us to cover in the future, then please do get in touch with us via social media or by email. Thank you very much once again for joining, and I hope you have a nice afternoon.
Okay, bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.